Hello, thank you for spending some of your afternoon with me. Thank you for Felicia for that beautiful introduction. I'm Lindsay, and we are going to use some Derwent Graphitint pencils. They are always a favorite with you guys, so I hope you have yours all ready to go. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. Like Felicia said, she can relay them to me, and we'll make sure that nobody is confused as we go through this. We're going to be working a little bit smaller. I started in my demo piece was in a 9 by 12 sketchbook, and I realized it took a little longer than an hour to do, so I'm gonna be working at about half that size. So without further ado, I'm gonna switch my camera to the overhead view, and we're gonna get going on this project. I can't wait. All right, now, you may notice there's a little bit of shine on this because it is a graphite product. What I recommend if after you finish your artwork, if it's looking real shiny to you, you can spray it with some fixative. You can also use hairspray in a pinch if you're not worried about the archival quality of it. I did print out my reference photo so that we could have that on screen as we go. I'm gonna start framed like this, but if it seems like we want to have it a little bit more zoomed in, I can also zoom in and I can move I can shift everything over a little bit. But we'll start like this and see how it looks to everybody. I'm going to begin using a chestnut pencil, and it's kind of a brownish color. And I'm going to start by just drawing my center pumpkin. And you want to try to get that kind of centered up on your page. I draw a little bit darker than I would like you to begin with, just because I want to make sure it shows up for you. And that's just gonna kind of base in and save that space. Now we've got another one right behind it, and this one's tipped on an angle. So I'm gonna draw this kind of rounded square shape. And again, I'm going darker than you need to go. We're looking right across the edge of that, so it's gonna appear more squat. And then we've got this big old guy right here in the back, and it's a little bit more rounded because it's kind of tipped towards us and we can see where the stem is coming in. And there we go. Now my reference photo had a spoon in there and some little, it looks like a dried something, maybe currants or something. I'm not sure. Um, so I'm eliminating that. I'm just gonna do the pumpkins here. So you are the boss when it comes to your artwork. You can eliminate things, you can add things, make your pictures work for you. Now I need to put my stems in, and I think I'm gonna start by getting the shape of these sections first. So I'm gonna start with the center, and I'm gonna kind of like almost looks like a almost looks like a pumpkin seed or a sunflower seed kernel here, but it's kind of like elongated oval. Now this one in the middle, the lines of it, if we were to look at any of these pumpkins dead on, like if we look at this pumpkin right here and you look at this line, it's almost straight because that one's kind of like right in front of our eyeballs. But then as we go away from that, and it gets closer to the edge of the pumpkin, our lines curve. Okay, so just keep that in mind as you're putting your lines in on your pumpkins. And I like to kind of draw these segments like this because it helps us get volume. And when our picture has volume, it looks more three-dimensional, it looks more realistic, and it just works a little bit better.
Hey, Lindsay, really quick, there was a couple of questions. Someone is asking, is it okay for them to use, um, I lost the question just that quick. They had some different pencils that they wanted to use.
Or any sort of water-soluble pencil. You could even just, if you just had like a water-soluble graphite, you could do it in just grayscale. If you're using watercolor pencils, you could do that as well. You'll just have a more vibrant effect. The same thing goes with like ink tints, Derwent watercolor. Any of those pencils are going to work just fine for these techniques. You'll just have a little bit different of a look than what I have. It's fine. Art should all be a little bit different. We're not all clones. We all want to have things that are our own, right? I decided that I'm gonna make this pumpkin come out a little bit more on that side. And I am going to do the same thing here. I'm going to start with that center one because I think it's easier to start with a centerpiece.
And really quick, also, someone was asking if there was any type of handout. I didn't find any. So I didn't know if there was
Nope.
any other template that they was available.
Nope, because we're drawing this one together. I did not have a handout for this class. but the reference photo is from Unsplash. And I do have a photo of the pumpkins on my blog and on my Instagram if you want to look at the final artwork and have it a little bit closer for you. Now, on this big pumpkin up here, the stem is actually going to come in right about there. So what I'm going to do is start this kind of frontmost section a little bit lower. All right, we'll sketch our little stem in there, and I'm going to sketch it kind of lightly because it's going to end up being green, and this is a kind of a brownish color. Okay. Now, one other thing, you can either put it in or you can omit it, but if you want to put like a table line in there, I'm going to grab my T-square for that. I find the T-square is just such a great tool to have because I don't know about you, but I have the hardest time drawing a straight line. I put it up a little bit higher on this piece than I did on my demo piece, mainly because I that back pumpkin I had a little higher. So there's just a glimpse at the finished piece for a second, so you can kind of see what I did there. And now we're going to go for our most orangey red pencil. So if you don't have, if you have these, go for, I would actually go for the autumn brown. Now, sometimes it can be tricky to tell what we have for a color. So I would recommend having a scrap of paper, swatch out the color, but that's not going to tell the whole story. You really need to see what it looks like with water. So if you don't have a swatch of your pencils, just have just a scrap of paper handy that you can swatch on. But I would recommend making a swatch and like sticking it into the lid of your tin because that will really help make sure that you know exactly what you have. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm using the pencil on its angle, on its edge, and I'm shading in the entire big orange pumpkin. Now the Graphitint line does not have a yellow in it. It has its closest thing would be either like a light brown or the meadow green. So we've got to kind of approximate our yellows. But if you're using watercolor pencils, you probably have a yellow and you can add yellow here into the highlight area. That's totally up to you. I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow using port. Port is kind of, I'll just swatch it so you can see in case you're trying to match it with something else. It's like almost, it's quite a purple, but it's kind of like a maroon color. And I'm going to add that down into the bottom area. I like to use the edges as much as I can of my pencil and rotate my pencil as I go, and that keeps the points sharp so I don't have to stop and sharpen. And that makes me waste way less pigment. And these are very long lasting pencils, which is nice because there's only 24 in the line. Now they are available open stock as well. So if you run out of a color, or maybe you're waiting to see if you like these pencils before you purchase them, and you decide you just want a few colors, you can do that. I like that with all the Derwent products, so you're not stuck buying a whole new set if you just need a couple colors. Right, now I'm gonna use a filbert brush, but you can use a flat or a round, whatever you like. I've used a round for this for this project too. It doesn't really matter. The key is not to get too much water on your brush. You want your brush wet but not sopping. You don't want drippy puddles. You basically want a brush that's stiff enough to dissolve and move the pigment, but not so stiff that it damages your paper. So I like nylon or Tacklon. You don't want a super absorbent like faux squirrel or real fur brush because they just hold too much water. What I'm doing here, when I get water, I dip just the bristles in. I try not to get it on the ferrule, and then I scrape off the extra water, and that's perfect. That's how much water I want. I just want to break down the pigment but I don't want it just washing all over the place. If you want to refine an area, you can kind of scrub and push with your brush. A
Lindsay, what's
round
the
brush is
first
totally
color
fine
you
for it.
use?
This, I started off with autumn brown, which is really kind of a reddish orange, and I did my shadows with the color port, which is kind of a maroon, like a port wine. Now, because I'm using mixed media paper, it is buckling a little bit while it's wet. Watercolor paper with this much water shouldn't do that. But I'm using the same paper I used for my original one. I just wanted to keep it, just to make sure that it was going to react the same way. Now, if you want to have a little bit of a highlight anywhere, you can clean your brush off and blot it on your paper towel, and you can go in and scrub out little areas. Just kind of, we're not going to go back to the white of the paper, but sometimes if we know we're going to put, especially like the white pencil down in the future, it's nice to kind of lift out a little bit of the pigment in those areas. But you can do that later too. You don't have to do it now, but I figured, yeah, why not? Now for this one, I want to find a color that's going to be a little bit more yellowy. So I'm going to try that sage. I think that one actually, when we add water to it, it's kind of is that one called sage? Yes, that's called sage. But when you really water it down, you kind of get a bit of a golden look to it. And I'm going to start by just doing a very light coating of that all over this front pumpkin. Now, if it feels like we're working pretty quick, um, if you want to take a break and just watch, you always can follow along with a replay where you can slow it down or you can pause it. Art is meant to be enjoyed, and if you feel like it's too rushed and you just want to watch it through once, there's nothing wrong with that. I have a lot of students that like to do that. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of the meadow, which is also a very yellowy green color, and I'm going to add just patches of that here and there. Take a look at this russet color. Let's see what that looks like when we water it down. I think it's going to look fairly similar to our. Oh no, that's got a really nice yellowy tone into it. I want to use some of that. Add some patches of that. Now, another good idea would be, but it will make your pencils not as pretty because they look so pretty like this. But another idea you can do is you could take a little like a office label, like a return address label. You could swatch out your pencil with that, add water, and then stick it on your pencils. Now, like I said, it's not as pretty, but it is really handy to see those colors right at a glance. But I also like the way these look just on their own, so I haven't done that myself. But it's a bad idea. All right, I wet these down because I need to see what it's really going to look like. So when I'm doing that, generally I'll kind of bounce around. I'll do my light areas first, so I don't just make everything muddy. So see how I'm kind of bouncing between, like getting all those lighter areas where I don't have so much pigment. And now I'm going to work out into the green areas. By the way, I have my paper taped down onto just a piece of chloroplast, which is a like a corrugated plastic, but I save the backs of art paper pads. That works great too. Doesn't really matter, something to tape it down to. And that's just going to keep it from buckling and warping too much while we're working. And now moving into that browner area. Don't worry, it's not supposed to look good at this stage. It's going to be real messy until we get about to the end. So embrace the hot mess stage of your painting. Now, another tip is to, once you get these first washes down, is to let the pumpkins dry before you go over it with a pencil again. Otherwise, you might tear your paper. And if I went in on this wet area with a pencil, that mark that I make is not going to lift up. It's going to become permanent into the fibers of the paper. So I want to make sure that whatever I put on that paper is, I want to stay there. Now, let's see. I want to, I want to swatch out that russet again, see what that looks like. That's a little warm. I think I'm going to take the meadow green because that's our one of our closest yellow colors, and I'm going to do a light coating on that pumpkin. And then I'm going to do a little of the russet. Don't put a lot of pigment down here though, just kind of mixing some colors. We're gonna make a kind of a neutrally yellow color. And then I think I'll do a little bit of that sage color. Now I'm hoping the any sort of red undertones in the russet will wipe out any of the green. And then I'm gonna add water and see what we have. And see how it makes kind of a bit of a yellow there. Even though yellow is a primary color, we can kind of eke the colors over to where we want them, even though we're going with greens that have a lot of yellow in them. And take the red, and the red kind of negates the green, and that's how we get that little bit of a yellow tone there. Process for this is mainly just getting a base layer down and then adding detail on top. I want to get the stems going, and I'm going to use some ivy. Because these lift up so well, I don't have to worry about stray marks in the background. They'll just dissolve and be part of it, and it'll be fine. Now I gotta wait for that one to dry because I dragged some of the water up into that. And I'm gonna add a little bit of green gray just around the base. I'm going to show you that technique. Remember when I said you don't want to use your pencils on the damp paper? Well, sometimes you actually do when you do want those lines to not lift off. And I want to have some of those darker uh, kind of indents on the stem here. So I'm going to use this slate green, and I'm going to draw into the wet paper here. And that's actually going to dent the paper and impart some visual texture as well as actual real texture. We'll do the same thing on this one. And this one actually is a darker stem altogether, so I think I'll just go right in with this darker color. That will give us some nice contrast.
Lindsay, there's a question asking, are the pencils light fast?
Oh, I am not 100% sure on that. If you go to derwent.com and you look at their color charts, they have them all rated on the blue wool scale, which is a rating system between 1 and 8. So anything above a like a 5 to 6, I believe, is good light fastness. A 7 and 8 would be excellent light fastness. You'd really have to look. I'm sure it varies per color. The graphite would be light fast, but the whatever they use to color it, some of them may be light fast and some may not. And I don't know off the top of my head, so sorry, I don't have the answer for that one. But Derwent, just check out their color charts. And if somebody knows, if somebody has their color chart in front of them and wants to put it in the um in the chat, that would be great. Take that russet, and I am going to do a base on the kind of the area where the pumpkins are sitting. Please apply the pencil in a horizontal fashion so that if we have any streaks that don't dissolve out, they'll be going with the grain of the table. So if you were concerned about light fastness and there was a color that you wanted that wasn't light fast or wasn't available, you could always go with a water soluble graphite. I believe the ones that Derwent sells are called Graphitone or Aquatone. Aquatone might have been their watercolor pencils, but I think it's Graphitone. And you could do your sketch with that and then add light fast watercolor paints that you know to be light fast.
And Lindsay, some are having issues seeing the bottom of the paper.
Okay, why don't I push this up and zoom in a bit? I was worried about that. We'll shift everything over a bit. And I can put the reference right there. Is that a little bit better?
I'm waiting for them to respond. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, we'll just kind of tuck that into the corner. That should work. Okay. So I put down the russet. Now I'm going to take some of the cool brown and I'm going to add that especially in and around our pumpkins. So it's going to start to build our shadow. But again, try to, as you pull the strokes out, keep them with that horizontal direction of the wood grain. Don't worry about being super neat at this point because we're still just putting that base layer. But that base layer takes so much time. You know, when you go to put details, you're not putting that much pigment down. Um, so a lot of the time on this is just taken up with filling the paper. And that's why I had to go to a smaller size for the live stream. It always takes me longer to talk and paint than just to paint on its own. All right, I'm gonna go, I think I'll use a flat brush. I have I think it's about a 5/8. It's just a little bit larger. You don't have to use a brush this big, but I just want to get in there and liquefy as much as possible. But as I do this, notice how I'm going to use on the chisel edge here and kind of wiggle my brush back and forth. And that's going to help me start building up some texture of the wood grain. Make every stroke count. Don't worry if you kind of get into the edge of the pumpkin or it gets a little messy. We can fix that. So these lift up very well. One thing I try to avoid is arcing my arm when I do that. It's very easy to do because then we end up instead of straight lines, we have rainbow arcs. The name of the game is dissolving our pigment on this layer, and then it's just if we can get a little of that wood grain texture, we go ahead and do that too. And then I recommend turning your paper because otherwise it's going to be kind of awkward to do. You've got two tealy blue colors in your set of 24, ocean blue and shadow. And I'm just going to swatch them real quick here. This one is shadow. This one is ocean blue. We'll add some water so we can see. So ocean blue is a beautiful teal, brighter color, and the shadow is more of a muted gray teal. So if you like one more than the other, you could, you can do more of that color. I like them both. I probably prefer the brighter blue a little bit more. So I'm going to go in with the ocean blue and completely coat the background. Rotate your pencil as you go so you have a nice sharp edge. Now, as you get around your pumpkins, just try not to overlap this ocean blue on your pumpkins just because it is such a strong color. If you don't like what a bright color that is, just use the shadow instead. I like to turn my paper so that the point of my pencil where I'm trying to get a good edge is pointing towards that edge I'm trying to keep neat. The nice thing about water-soluble media, water-soluble pencils, is that you don't have to be as precise with your application as you would if you were doing this in a non-water soluble pencil. To have a smooth background in, say, Color Soft or Derwent Artist or Derwent Lightfast, you'd want to be really careful about how you applied your color. But since we're going to add water to this, it's going to move these particles very easily, and we don't have to take as much time or be as careful. You can use any of your water-based Derwent products as an underpainting for non-water soluble pencils as well. The graphitint, though, might be a little slick with the graphite because that tends to be a shiny product. But like the Derwent Intense or watercolor, those are really nice as a base layer for color pencil. All right, I'm gonna put more color towards the bottom. So see how I'm adding more, you see less tooth down there. And in and back, pumpkins here. And some more over here. Now, if the bright blue is too bright, you can take that shadow color and you can glaze in some of that too, and that will help tone down the brightness if you don't like it. I think it gives it a nice complexity and gives it a little bit more of that graphite look. So I'm adding both colors, but that's totally up to you. It's like cooking, do you like it spicier? Add more spice. Do you not like spice? Don't add the spice. Now, another thing about the graphitint is that it is difficult to get a really smooth background. So I go with that attribute of it, and I decided I'm going to do a textured background here, just kind of like crisscross and scumble my strokes because I know it's going to be really hard to keep it really smooth. So I'm going to go with a texture and get kind of like a stucco or plaster effect in the background. If you wash this out and you're like, oh, it's not dark enough, I lost too much color, let it dry and do it and just go right over it. It's very forgiving. But I would let it dry first, otherwise you're gonna have some harsh marks where you put your pencils down and it might not dissolve as well. Wet paper is fragile paper. Just keep that in mind. And that's when your paper pills, which you probably won't have that issue with the graphitin just because graphite is a lubricating product. Like um, if you've ever built Pinewood Derby cars with your kids or your own, you'll know that you lubricate the wheels with graphite so that they'll go faster. The same thing. This is lubricating the paper so it doesn't pill.
There's a couple of questions. One is asking, I think, why is it darker at the bottom? I'm going to assume she's saying darker at the blue.
Yep, I have more blue, have it darker at the bottom to give us a little bit more visual weight and make it feel like, usually your light is coming from above, like an overhead light. So you're going to have more light at the top of the wall, the top of the pumpkins, and then under the pumpkins, lower on in the wall, you would have, it would just be darker. It's just going to give us a little bit of realism, a little bit of natural lighting.
And then there's another question asking, what is the difference between the graphite pencil and the Derwent Inktense pencils?
The Inktense pencil is that once you add water to an Inktense pencil and it soaks into your paper, it's permanent. You can actually use it on fabric, and there's no graphite in that product. And the Graphitint product is a graphite plus a colorant, and you can lift that up off the paper. Colors may stain a bit, but the biggest difference would be the inclusion of graphite on the Graphitint versus the Inktense. Like it'd be very difficult to go in and lift up like a highlight with the Inktense because it would have already have seeped into the paper and created a stain on the paper. Okay, now we're gonna go in and add another layer onto our pumpkins. I'm gonna start with port over on this big pumpkin on the edge. And now I'm using the tip of my pencil a little bit more. You don't always have to add water to water-soluble pencils. Um, I think a lot of people think that if you are using watercolor pencils, you might as well add water to them, and that is probably their best use. But sometimes you want to keep a detail, or you want to keep that color saturation, or you want to, you just want to adjust something. So you don't have to add water. I know some artists that buy watercolor pencils instead of regular colored pencils because they think the color payout is better and they never add water to them. And that is totally fine too. I personally like the creamy feel of a traditional pencil if I'm not going to add water. But if I know I'm going to want to wash it out, I will more likely use a watercolor pencil product like the Graphitint or the Inktense or the watercolor pencil because it's otherwise I would have to use like a solvent like odorless mineral spirits to get the same effect. And it's much easier to do it this way. So just by adding that bit of shading, that port, it's giving us a little bit more form and realism. Now, the downside to not adding water to these, though, is you start to build up a shine on the paper. Now, my final piece, like I mentioned before, I use Fixative on, which is an alcohol-based spray, and it somehow it seems to just dull the surface so that you don't get that shine anymore. Well, that's something to consider. I'm not gonna liquefy everything, and I'm kind of even using my fingers to take some of the excess water off my brush, but I do want to spread it a little bit. I'm getting some of the texture there, but especially where I put a lot of color and it's gotten a little shiny, I want to break that down just a little bit and pull the color out to the edge so it overlaps the tabletop. Try to keep my hands out of the way. Just kind of scooch it out a bit. I don't want to have a gap like a halo, a white halo on the tabletop or on the background for that matter, so I can push my lines out a little bit if I need to. There's not much water at all on my brush. Okay. And while I'm at it, I think we're going to just kind of bring up this pumpkin and then we'll move it to the next one. I think I want a little bit more of a neutral tone. I'm going to use the chestnut. I hope it's not glaring on camera. If you want to sharpen your pencils, please feel free. I do want a little bit of a lininess here, so I am using the tip of my pencil, but I'm not putting a ton of stuff down there. And I'm also going to add some highlights. Now, generally, I do this as my last step, but since we're over here working on this pumpkin, I do want to bring it to kind of a more finished level. And I like to use the white pencil dry. Now, I don't think the white has graphite in it. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's graphite in the white. And it's quite opaque, which is surprising for a water-based pencil. They're generally kind of kind of wimpy, but this one actually does work pretty well if you use it dry. And if it's too harsh, then wet it a bit and you can soften it. All right. I think that's all right for now. I know I'm gonna add some black in there, but I don't like to put black on this early just because that's so harsh and it can mix in with the other colors, especially since we have a little bit of white there and get muddy. So I like to put the black on last and be very careful about how I put water in. I'm using the green gray just to put some stronger streaks going with the contour of the stem. And it is shiny a little bit, so I'm tipping it up so I can get away from the shine. And let's see, take some of that slate green and add a little bit, that's really dark. Add a little bit of shadow just at the base. And this is kind of a deep groove, and that's a couple deep grooves in the stem. I want to put those in too. All right, now green is the opposite of red. So if I do want a dark shadow, I can use the green, this this slate green down here at the bottom of this pumpkin, and it will mix optically with the kind of that port reddish purpley color, and it will almost look black. See how that almost looks black there? And that's why it's so important to learn color theory if you want to get better at shading and choosing colors, because sometimes you just end up with something that's just too bright or too light, and you want to darken it up a bit. And you usually get a much more natural look if you take a color's opposite rather than taking black and adding it into your painting. I'm also going to do that right there, just kind of bring out that edge. So I'm going to leave that pumpkin as done for now. And we're going to move over to this guy. While I have this slate green in my hand, I'm going to go in and add some of that to my stem. This is a really cuts through those other colors too. It's a real strong one. I like that quite a bit. And then there are some green spots on this pumpkin that I want to put in there. Now, I recommend changing your holding pattern of your pencil so you get a variety of strokes. Just like if I painted a whole painting using one brush, oftentimes it can get very repetitive, especially if I am not very skilled. So if I switch up different brushes, I'll have different marks and it will look a little more interesting. So the same thing with our pencils. I can change my hold of my pencil to kind of gripping it between my thumb and middle finger and then just resting my other fingers on there and just kind of scribbling with the edge. I can go up on the end a little bit more and get chunkier shapes. I can get broader shapes by going on the edge. And I don't have as much control this way. So it gives me a more random pattern, which for painting something that's natural often will look a lot more realistic rather than trying to specifically put in all of those patches of green. We have a tendency to want to make things match and want to make things perfect, but perfect doesn't work when you're doing nature. Random works so much better when you're doing nature. I like to bring those green little specks up in the kind of the indents between the ribs of the squash. I am so ready for some squash this year.
And Lindsay, just to make sure that you're still using the slate green.
Yes, I am. And then I'm gonna put a few little warts on the pumpkin. We've got a few in here. You can put as many or as few as you like. And those I would go up, I would hold a regular pencil grip and I would go up on the tip because I want detail at this point. So, and you can put them in different spots. Like on this one, I'm going to put it in a little bit different spot than my original. I'm going to put it where it works, and you're the artist, so you can put things in different areas. And then around these little wart areas, I am going to add a little bit, make sure it connects to one of the green patches so it kind of makes sense that it's green. I'm leaving a little highlight on it. You could do that with the white. We might even accent it with the white after, but by leaving it in there, leaving that highlight, it makes me remember that, oh yes, that's a little wart. We wanna leave that. I'm gonna grab some of the let's see. Oh, I want this ivy here. I'm gonna add that around our green patches. Build up that color, make it a little bit more interesting. Basically shading with the edge of my pencil over the green patches. I think this is one of these techniques, like painting these pumpkins, where there's really no way to mess it up. If you put your color down a little differently, that's totally fine. If you choose a different color, That's totally fine. Your pumpkin, your gourd might be a little bit more green, mine might be a little bit more orange. It does not matter. The important thing is just to, get some variety of color down. I'm going in with the meadow now for just some lighter, brighter patches. And I think at this point, I'm gonna just dampen my brush, and I'm not gonna brush over it because I want to keep some texture, but I'm just gonna kind of stab at the picture with my brush, not like straight up and down because then that's gonna hurt your brush, but kind of at a little bit of an angle. I don't want to get rid of all those dark green marks, but I do want to kind of let the color get a little bit more punchy. And when you add water, the colors get a little bit more punchy. And we don't have much water on this brush. All right. I want something a little bit warmer in there. I think I might go with this sage. So it has a little bit of a warmth to it, but it's not super dark. And I'm gonna just redefine those little ribs, the indents, and add a little bit of shading at the bottom. And you take a little bit of this autumn brown as well and add some patches with that. And I'm keeping it really chunky, really textured. Now I'm going to go back in with the slate green, which is our dark, really dark color, and bring in a little bit more, really nestling that stem in because I felt like there was, on mine anyway, I had a little bit of a gap of color. And I'm going to use this at the bottom of the pumpkin to shade it a little bit more too, and it can mix in with that autumn brown that has that red in it that we just put there, and they're gonna cancel each other out a bit and get real dark and neutral. And see how it almost looks like black there because that autumn brown has a lot of red in it, and the slate green has a lot of green in it, and they're just kind of canceling each other. And then I'm going to redefine our little warts here. And I grab my white pencil. Hopefully it's dry enough. And I'm going to add some highlights. Think of where the light would hit our little pumpkin here. I want to try adding a little bit of water onto the tip of my white pencil. I'm wondering if that would help it be a little bit more opaque. I'm just scribbling it off on the lid of my tin here to see if I can get it to. Oh yeah, look at that. Look at that. Get a really nice little touch of color there. So here's now this is a little controversial, but so I'll show you how to do it the right way. Um, so you can see how much lead I have there. And so we've got the lead, we've got the wood, and we've got the painted barrel. All you want to get in the water is the lead. Don't get the wood wet because then you could have some swelling and that could crack. But I'm just putting that in. Let's see, can you see? I'm just getting the tip of that in the water and giving it a second to absorb. And then we can go in where we want a really bright highlight. You could also do a gel pen later if you wanted to, but I really wanted to stick to this set of pencils for the class, so it wouldn't be overwhelming. I think I gotta let that dry a little bit more before I put too much white on there, but we've got to start anyway. We've got an idea. Oh, I just got on my finger. Oh, another thing you can do is if you've taped your paper down, if you use masking tape, masking tape has a roughness to it. You can scribble your pencils down onto the tape and then you can use that as a palette. So I could pick that up with a little brush, a little bit of water. I don't think I got my brush in the water. There we go. And you can turn that into a little bit of a little paint as well. It's kind of thirsty. They're kind of a thirsty pigment. We're gonna move on to that other pumpkin. Just a second. I wanted to use up that white. I know I'm gonna stick my finger in it if I don't stick my hand in it. Just adding some of the liquefied white in there. All right, the last one's a little bit simpler because there's not as much going on and it's not as big as the other pumpkins. We're going to go in with the russet and add some shading at the bottom. Pull it up in between the indents of the ribs. Get it right down to this little crevice here where the light would be more blocked out. I want to put some little patches. I go over with the chestnut, which is kind of an orangey toned brown. Since we don't have a bright orange, this chestnut will serve as our orange. We kind of just go with the closest color when you're using a limited range of colors, like say the Derwent drawing or the Derwent Graphitint, though they only have 24 colors in the range. So my advice is when you're working with a limited palette like that, it's a wonderful challenge, and your work will end up looking a little more sophisticated when you take a challenge like that. Um, Instead of trying to find the color, if you can't find the color, go for the value. The value is more important anyway. So when you're choosing between getting the right color and getting the right value, go for the value. And the value is simply how dark or light an object is. I'm just kind of bouncing my brush so I keep that bit of visual texture that those gourds have. It has kind of like oh, just kind of like a little bit of a patchy pattern on it. If you want to have more red, you could use the autumn brown.
Lindsay, there's a question asking, would you use colored pencils instead of graphitint if you can't find the right color?
Yeah, you could use regular colored pencils. You could use uh, if you're going to add it to this piece you've already added graphite to, I would wait till you're completely done because if you go in and add some colored pencils now and then decide you want to go back in with more water soluble pencils, it's going to resist and give you a hard time. So as long as you do it when you're all done with the other stuff, it won't be a problem. I'm taking some green gray, just adding some kind of lines into this stem and covering up my sketchy lines that were that reddish brown. And then I'm going to go in with the slate green. If you want to sharpen your pencils at any point to get more detail, you certainly can. My pencil sharpener is obnoxiously loud, so I'm just going to muddle through here like that. And I want a little bit more definition in here. I'm going to use this sage on the edge because I want to sharpen up some areas here and redefine my sketch a little bit. Please feel free to keep working on this after the class and, relax, enjoy. Go over to my Instagram page to snag a photo of the finished artwork or on my blog. I'm going to take a little bit of cocoa and add some more shadows down here towards the bottom. I'm bringing up the shadow. I'm starting it. Oops, I just snapped the tip. I'm starting it dark where the two pumpkins meet, and then I'm just kind of dragging up the shadow at the indents of the ribs. A little bit less as I reach higher into the painting, but I want to separate those pumpkins a little bit. And then I'm going to take the white and add, where'd my white go? Right here. Add some highlights to it, help define some edges. Now my paper's still a little bit damp, and that's not really ideal for going over with the white. So you might want to hit it with a heat tool just so you don't tear your paper. And I'm going to throw a little bit of that in here into the stem as well to help define the edge. I also have a time lapse of this project when I did the larger one on my YouTube channel if you would like to see that, if you haven't seen it yet, or if you need a refresher. And now I'm going to go in with a black pencil because I like to do that last. That's kind of my ace in the hole. I know if I haven't been able to get a dark enough value, the black will be the darkest color I have here. And I am going to first start by adding some lines onto my tabletop. And you can use a ruler for this. I'd recommend it. And I like to have things overlapping, so I'm going to do my first line on either side of this pumpkin. A T-square is so good for this. If you got a T-square, I highly recommend using it. And then I'm going to do one back here, but I don't want to have it as dark. I'm not going to press as hard, so I'm just going to go real light with that. Then I'm going to put a few like nail holes. So if you think of this being a old farm table, put a few nail holes next to um the lines that you put in there. And I'm going to add some shading at the occlusional shadow. That is where your pumpkins will touch the top, touch the surface. That's where it will be the darkest. Anytime you have two surfaces meeting, that's where you have your darkest shadow. And then as you kind of like this edge of the pumpkin, you said it's kind of not touching the table, that's in the air. So I'm not going to have that dark shadow all the way around. Just like here, when it gets in the air, the shadow's not going to go, it's not going to cling up close to the pumpkin as much as when it's up in the air. And then I'm going to grab another, let's see, let's do russet. And I'm just going to kind of throw in some wood grain accents. Just kind of what I do is I'll look for streaks that I've already made with a brush, and I'll just kind of draw some more scribbly wiggly lines. Think about how wood grain looks naturally and try to keep it random. If you've ever seen like laminate flooring, you can always see where the pattern repeats, especially if it wasn't installed very thoughtfully. And same thing here. I try to make it repeat a little bit, not repeat rather. And I'm going to take a flat brush, just a little bit of water on it, and just kind of bring that pigment into that wood grain pattern a little bit. You don't want to do everything because it's nice to see some of that grainy texture on the wood, I think. It gives you a nice contrast from the texture of the pumpkins. I just try to keep it nice and dark up next to the pumpkin. And you can add more if it gets too light when you go and add water. Like you maybe push the pigment not exactly where you intended to. You can always go in and add more. And I'm going to do that with the black add just a little bit more. Okay, and then if you feel like you need just a little bit more definition on the pumpkins themselves, you can use the black pencil like normal, and you can go in and put some, a little bit outlining. I would mostly focus it on the bottom uh edges just so that you don't end up with it being too dark, but you can also do some in the stem because the stem value-wise is much darker than the flesh of the pumpkin. And we take our tape off and see how it looks. If you have a fragile paper, then you can always heat it with a heat tool first to make sure that it's not going to rip your paper. In fact, I probably should have done that because I've never tried taping this paper before, so luckily it works. And I would love it if you wanted to share any of your finished projects with me. You can tag me at Lindsay Wyrick on Instagram, or you can also use the hashtag Make It with Michaels, and you could tag Derwent US too. I'm just gonna move my camera back up. But boy, we had flames coming off of our brushes there. I think we were flames coming off of the pencils. We were working so fast. If anybody wants to hold up their pumpkins where you are, I would love to take a quick little sneak peek here. Oh my goodness, Cindy, that looks so good. Wow, that's so three-dimensional. Oh my gosh. Oh wow, Jill, that looks awesome. Sarah, wow, that looks so good. Oh my gosh, Joanne did like beautiful orange and yellow pumpkins. Oh my gosh, these all look so good. The names are so tiny on the screen, I can't I can't read them all. I'm loving ones that also use a brighter color palette. Oh my gosh, Penny, that looks so good. It looks so natural. Holy moly, you guys, you had flames coming off your pencils. Wow. Oh, I hope you tag me with those because I want to look really close and see those. I know what's so awesome is that we're all different. We all painted the same thing, and all of our artwork is completely original and it looks like us, right? It looks like we painted it. And that's what I absolutely love about teaching is seeing how everybody interprets um, the source material and then tweaks it a little bit to meet their style and their preferences. Well, it has
And
been a wonderful hour. I want to
before
thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with me, and I hope you had a wonderful time. On behalf of Derwent and Michaels, my name is Lindsay Wyrick. Thank you so much for joining us today. Until next time, happy crafting.
also, really quick
Bye.
before everyone leave, if you can one more time, raise your pictures up. I want to get a picture really, really quick so I can show my supervisors of all of your work. Give me 1 second. I want to get
Hold
it.
on.
Hold on. I want to get them all. If you don't mind, just keep holding them up for me. I'm taking a couple of pictures because we have a lot of people in this class. So definitely keep them up. Give me just another second because these are awesome. Just in an hour of your time. Don't worry, no one will have your names. I just want to be able to show them your pictures. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Just like Lindsay said, I hope you all have a great weekend. And until next time, bye, everybody.
Bye.